Hello there, friends. Welcome to another 7-Minute Bible. Andrew here, and we're looking at what I like to call the begats and the begottens, the first of the genealogies that we see in Scripture, specifically Genesis 4:16 through the entire chapter of 5. So Genesis 4:16 through 5:32. Let's get our timer started, and away we go. So if you think of these genealogies or these family trees as boring, you're going to want to sometimes skim through them. And I want to urge you to see, okay, what might be interesting here to us? Remember that these are actual people. That if you saw your own name in here, you would perk up. Or if you saw the name of someone you knew, that you would perk up. So each of these people have a role to play. So they tend to use these genealogies to root Genesis in history. And so therefore we see a measure of time, not necessarily years, because this was in some ways prehistoric history. So we don't have dates and times, but we have the lengths of time that people lived, or the lengths of seasons. So we don't need to necessarily get into that. Was this an actual year? How is it that people lived so long? Even if you called it seasons that they lived, Methuselah lived to be almost 1,000 years old. That's still 250 years if you break it down into 4 seasons. But that's not necessarily what we're trying to do here. As a matter of fact, we tend to raise more questions than we answer when we study Scripture. And I think that's the way it's meant to be. That's what really pulls us into the story here. So we want to note some of the differences in the patterns. So that's what I'm doing here with Genesis 4:16 through 5:32, is just pulling out some of the differences in the patterns that we typically see in genealogies. So we see that Cain was married. There's a question right there that's often a big question, is where did Cain get his wife? I'm not going to answer that for you because I don't know. There's different theories of that. But Cain had a son named Enoch, and then that was the name of the first city too. Cain built a city and named it for Enoch. We see in verse 17 of chapter 4. Then generations later, Lamech, a great grandson, I believe, of Cain, has 2 wives. And so it's interesting to note when women are mentioned, because it's often, I'm sorry, ladies, male-centric in these genealogies. So when women stand out, what is the reason for that? And that's what I think is neat about Scripture. In a male-centric society, that women were often mentioned in these Scriptures when they didn't necessarily have to be. Unfortunately, they're mentioned because their sons are noteworthy. So Jabal is the son of Ada, which is one of the women, and he is the father of tent dwellers. So we start to see a diversification of humanity here, that perhaps these are the people that became tent dwellers and livestock farmers or shepherds. Then Jubal is another born of Ada, and I wonder, just off the top of my head, is that connected to words like jubilee or celebration? Because these people were the father of musicians, specifically those that play the lyre and the pipe. Then you have Tubal-Cain is born of the other woman mentioned of Lamech's wives, Zillah. And so Tubal-Cain is the forger of bronze and iron tools, so or instruments. So maybe this was kind of a pre-industrial. These are the people who are known for making tools. And then we're not sure why, but a sister, Naamah or Naamah, is named here. Then there's some obscure poetry. Lamech is commits a murder after someone wounds him, and so we find this strange poetry. If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. I don't have much more to say about that. Then we shift into the descendants of Seth, or the descendants of Adam, rather. The next child after Cain and Abel that we know of is Seth, which means God appointed. As Eve notes, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. So there's another curious phrase then that will come into play. After Seth has Enosh, it says that at that time people began to call upon the name of the Lord. Again, this is important because it will set up a contrast when in chapter 6, when we find that people were doing evil continually. And so therefore, apparently some were calling upon the name of the Lord when this evil began to spread. There is a reiteration in chapter 5 as we move into another portion of this genealogy, that humans were created in God's image. And then we see a more established pattern. In other words, we see that so and so lived a certain number of years, fathered so and then this person lived another X number of years, had other sons and daughters, and the total years of their life were X, whatever the time frame was. So that is the pattern that we see for each of these. And again, we want to check and see, well, what are the breaks in that pattern? We see that Seth is created in Adam's likeness, which and image, which plays into we are created in the image of God, but then we also take after the image of our father and mother. And so this plays into Genesis 6 as well, when we are looking at the concept of how is it that the people who bear the image of God had become so evil. So these are a bunch of spoiler alerts. But Enoch is another big exception here. And Enoch walked with God, it says. As a matter of fact, it says it twice in verses 22 and 24 of chapter 5. And he was not, for God took him. So what does that mean? Did he die? Did he not die and was just taken? Then we come to Methuselah. Is just interesting because this was the longest living person, 969 years. And then finally we get to Noah. Out of the ground that the Lord had cursed, this one shall bring relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. So I want to finish. We've got just a few seconds left here, but with an interesting concept that someone made me aware of, and this might seem forced to some, but if you look at the fact that names meant something and names were important in that time, we can look at each of these descendants of Adam and look at what their names mean. And if it works this way in Hebrew, I'm not sure, but in English it's very interesting how it almost points out a gospel message. You have Adam, simply means man. Seth means appointed or God appointed. Enosh means mortal. Kenan means sorrow. Mahalalel means the blessed God. Jared means shall come down. And there's our time. We'll stop that. Enoch means teaching. Methuselah means his death shall bring. Lamech means the despairing. And Noah means rest or comfort. So listen to this if you just read the names in English. Man appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God shall come down teaching. His death shall bring the despairing rest and comfort. Interesting. Might be a stretch, but do you hear the gospel message there? Man appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God, that is Jesus Christ, shall come down teaching, and his death shall bring the despairing rest or comfort. So that's all the time we have. The last thing I do want to mention is that Methuselah means his death shall bring. And as a matter of fact, it appears that the flood began the year Methuselah died. So lest we think this story that we're getting ready to look at is a horrible story, because it kind of is. It's not the cute Sunday school story we were told growing up. God wiping out everything. Look how indeed merciful God was, that the person who lived the longest, and if his death brought the beginning of the flood, wow, God is indeed merciful. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share if this has been helpful to you, and ring the bell to get notifications for new content. God bless you and have a great day.